And so once again, I want to welcome Geshe Dadul Namgyal to Sravasti Abbey for, I don't know, is this your 6th visit? We've lost count. A wonderful annual teaching with Geshe Dadul Namgyal, and we're happy to be able to share it with people online. So I want to give just a very short introduction of things. One is to introduce you to Geshe Dadul. I'm not going to embarrass him with a long biography. Please look on our website and find it. But because what he's done with sharing the Dharma is extensive and impressive and wonderful. Most notably, I mean, he teaches at Drepung Losling in Atlanta. He's involved with the Emory Tibet Science Initiative and has been for a long time. Has done a lot of tremendous work there, and works very closely with Venerable Thupten Chodron in helping, supporting, creating the series of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion that she is co-writing with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So Geshe Dadul's reach and influence with the Dharma in the West is extensive. And we actually owe a lot to Geshe Dadul kind of quietly working behind the scenes in many ways to help share the Dharma with those of us who speak English and only English. So we're really glad that you're here and very excited that you're teaching this text, 108 verses praising great compassion by Bhikshuni Losong Tayang. So if people have not downloaded the text, you can find in the chat box, should be able to find in the chat box now, a link that will help you to download the root text. And Geshe Dadul will note any places where he's working on the translation.
Yeah, so I'm thankful for this opportunity yet again for practicing Dharma by way of on the pretext of sharing it with others. What I particularly get to do is prepare myself for that, and that kind of is the main benefit that I get from this. I'm not so sure about the benefits that others get, if at all. And so for that, I'm sincerely very, very thankful for these opportunities through the years. So I'm thankful, particularly for proposing this topic for this time, dwelling on the topic of great compassion. And I was saying that we will be using the text called the 108 Phrases of Great Compassion by the Mongolian Sokpo Tayang. We call him Sokpo Tayang, which means Mongolian by the name of Tayang, but his full name happens to be Losang Tayang. From his composition, it is very clear that among others, he must have been very, very, very familiar with Bodhisattvas. And several of his compositions are almost one-to-one from the Bodhisattvas across the chapters. And knowing that he had written it while sitting through a Lung transmission, a Kanjura transmission, and without any text apparently, although he doesn't mention that, maybe not. He says that all kind of came in his thoughts, and then it almost seemed like once he had conceived all of them in these 108 verses, or close to that, around that, then he decided to put them into writing on the 8th day of the lunar month around that time. So it's very apparent that he was very, very familiar with Bodhisattvas and the ease with which he writes and compassion. It's very apparent that it not only intellectually understood the the dynamics, the sophistication, and the elements surrounding great compassion, but was a great unascetic, keeping low profile, yet a big, great practitioner. That was quite apparent from this composition. So, one of the proposal was to lead to a short meditation at the opening, which I will like to try using different methods. So maybe we could all position ourselves in a meditative form and try to do your best. Although I'll be just giving hints, which may not be that effective, that descriptive yet. You could be doing your part in really doubling down on them. We have a saying in Tibetan: the person who speaks may not be that skilled in speaking, but whatever he speaks, be the one who is listening to it, be very skillful in really filling in the gaps, filling in the lines in between and gaps and making it into a complete thing. So that's exactly what I would expect from you. I don't think that I have anything new, special, more to say, except I'm so indebted to the kindness you're showing me in giving me this opportunity. And together we have this opportunity of reeling in the Dharma and particularly talking about compassion. So please find yourself in a comfortable position with the backs upright, unless it is a problem. Maybe begin with 3 rounds of deep, deliberate breathing. We will be doing this in sync together at my signal. We breathe in through the nostrils and out through the mouth, right? And taking deep, measured, long in-breath, and then pausing a little bit if you need to, and then releasing it all out for 3 rounds. Let's do this. Now slowly let the breathing settle into its natural rhythm, taking time in slowly but gradually adjusting it to a natural flow, where you let breathing just take place on its own, breathing in and out through the nostrils, letting it be however it requires to be, without trying to exercise or impose any specific strength and then rhythm, none of that. Let it be as natural as possible. In the meantime, try to stay connected with the breathing, feeling the sensations associated with it, anchoring the mind to the real-time natural breathing by feeling the sensations associated with it. Be that sensations at the nostrils, at the entrance of the nostrils, in the nostrils, both when we inhale and exhale. In trying to stay connected with the breathing and the sensations associated with it, try to do so alertly, attentively, ardently, by bringing in a sense of delight, enthusiasm, and being with the breath in this natural, relaxed form. Maintaining clarity, both of the object as well as of the subject to object. And try to endure some strength, some degree of intentional focus and the object is the breath. In this way, try to fill one's mind fully with this awareness of the natural breathing, feeling sensations, while at the same time keeping away from judging over the sensations or trying to fix it, something like it, trying to figure out something new. With all of those just settle down, all we do is try to be with the breath, giving our best, with those forms of being alert, attentive, and delighted. This way, try to be with the breath. One breath at a time, round the whenever we catch ourselves having taken off, try to stay calm in the face of such a discovery, yet at the same time, be realistic in acknowledging it for what it is, gently bring the mind back to the breath and start over again. Now slowly let go of this focus on the breath. Try to bring the mind to the here and now with an openness, where you try to register the simple state of presence, awareness, beginning with an awareness of oneself through the sensations of the body in general. Acknowledge one's being here, but at the same time, giving in to any temptations of chasing after paths, resisting some, while at the same time maintaining wide openness of the mind. Just about whatever comes and goes in the open spaciousness of the mind. Again, here, in maintaining this open spaciousness, try to bring those factors of alertness, attentiveness, enthusiasm, all combined together. Once again, let go of this, focus on this mental spaciousness. Connect with one's deep sense of being, whole being, a deep sense of being. And connect with its essential nature, whatever it happens to be, however it may be all unfolding at this moment. On the basis of this relative openness, yet connected with oneself, try to wonder, how does one evaluate this life? What do you wish things to be otherwise? How do you relate to things that are unavoidable, inescapable part of it? Be that in terms of feelings, pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, neutral feelings. What is your outlook on them? Your natural, your ready outlook towards them. Also wonder about your outlook towards people of different positions in the society. Be that from the religious point of view, political point of view, economic achievement point of view, copper, leather, rise, fall, front of you, in terms of your natural reaction or response. How does it turn out to be? There's something particular that you aspire to do, that you wish you could have, something that you disdain for, something that you do not have any particular judgment on. Now slowly move away from this. Look at life in general, beginning with the life here and now at hand, thinking from the time you were born and until we might die. How do we evaluate it? Again, what are things that we wish to be different? Things that we aspire to be free from, to be bereft, to be free from, things to aspire to have that we currently do not have. How does the content of these thoughts, these aspirations, these listings pan out to be? Now slowly push beyond the boundaries of this life. What is one's reading, evaluation, a gut feeling rather than just borrowed, revealed. What's your at present gut feeling about what could be before? Likewise, what could entail this, follow this? Thinking of one's own current situation. What's the prospect ahead? And also thinking back in time. What could I learn to this situation that we're in at present? Is life totally good, as some say? Or is it a mixed bag? And that too in what terms? So this way, try to come to terms, try to come to be in phase with what one's unaltered, genuine, real, personal reading is. And then finally, how does compassion fit in this? Compassion in general, great compassion. Are they competing to have place in this worldview of yours, in this outlook of yours? Are they already there? Are they anticipated in the future? Are they welcome? Are they pursued? Are they valued? Are they going to be valued? Are they going to be upheld? How would that affect the trajectory, the dynamic, the quality of oneself? With these open-ended questions, let's now slowly, at our own convenience, mark of meditation, that let me have eyes and looking at ears, Okay. So what I'm right now sharing is the translation that you all should have a copy of, except as I move on, those stanzas that I thought, at least from my perspective, they needed some tricks here and there. I have permitted myself to do that, and for you to recognize that I have highlighted them in red. So unless you see red, it should be the same as your copy. If you see red, then that's the changes that I have made. Sometimes I have the full verse stanza itself in red, which means a big change. Or else I would have just changed some words. The reason why I did the reflection that I did was this topic of great compassion, let alone great compassion, just compassion itself. For it to be felt in a genuine and in a pure form, it has to be rooted in it has to be rooted in feeling the same on oneself, or in relation to oneself, in a similar situation that one is having, or supposedly having compassion towards others. And without that, what we call compassion could be very limited, as well as short-lived, and could even, of course, it is mixed with attachment, selfish self-interest, and all of that. But still, that could itself kind of serve as a source of problem leading one's life. So, in irrespective whether it's in the worldly sense or in the spiritual sense, compassion, of course, between having and not having, there would definitely be a significant shift, a significant contribution if one has it. And for having it, it would be better to have it in as pure and what do you call in as pure and as should I say complete in its own respective way, in a complete form. And that has to kind of start with feeling the same for oneself in a similar situation. And that's how it assures kind of a good grounding for compassion for others. So that's the reason why I did the reflection that I did. And particularly, it takes a special significance if we look at the topic and the practice and the relevance, the value and the range of compassion from a Buddhist perspective, particularly taking a Buddhist worldview into context. So here we are talking of great compassion. And before we do that, we have to first define what compassion is. Although these days I have seen even in the Western disciplines, be that in psychology or else in so many other social service oriented measures, and particularly these days, compassion is almost like a household term that everyone sees the need of, while at the same time feeling the shortage of, the lack of, at all the levels of our existence, beginning from the top level at the UN level also. So not only the leaders there speak of compassion in their lectures, in their presentations, but the UN as a system, as an institution itself, is not shying away from ever bringing compassion into focus. Plus, there were certain reports. I think one that I particularly remember is the report on UN report on happiness, right? UN report on happiness, where it very clearly dwelled on the concept of secular ethics as envisioned by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, kind of thinking of the need of promoting human values centered around compassion, and kind of approach in such a way that it would be accessible to everyone. So even general compassion, let alone great compassion, can be approached in so many different ways, from so many different angles, and in what do you call, in relation to what do you call, different range of worldview. So recently I have seen somewhere compassion being defined very similar to the Buddhist concept. Otherwise, before that, I had the feeling that we may speak in the same, we may use the same term and seemingly speak the same language of compassion, but when it comes to defining it, understanding it, which will affect the scientific research findings, all of those, it seemed to be not same, not in sync with the Buddhist understanding. It seemed to be mixed with love, what we would call love and compassion, no particular clear demarcation. But lately I've seen one, on one website, I think it's the Greater Good, Greater Good something. I don't know if that's the Greater Good group that had its beginning with someone with Buddhist background. But when I looked at it and looked for people associated with it, none of the familiar names showed up. So I was wondering it might be some other group with similar name, not necessarily the exact one. But when they define compassion, it's very similar to how we would define compassion. At any given level, the basic criteria for compassion is the wish for others to be free from suffering. Again, what that suffering involves and how far it goes, to how great range, all of those will differ among compassion. But the basic idea of its being an attitude associated with wishing, to begin with, a wish for others to be free from the observed suffering, that is seem to be gaining some ground, some recognition. But one has to be always wary of how differently compassion and likewise loving kindness, likewise empathy, etc., how differently they can be understood across the board. So one has to kind of first unpack that. So by way of unpacking the Buddhist understanding of compassion, it is, as opposed to loving kindness, it is a wish for others to be free from suffering. Likewise, in the case of loving kindness, it would be the same level of attitude, but focusing on irrespective of whether it's focusing on the joy that others have or the lack thereof, nonetheless, it takes the form of wishing them to have the joy or to continue to have the joy that they have or to kind of have the joy that they are lacking. So, but nonetheless, in the form of wishing for joy to be there, whereas in the case of compassion, it is wishing for the suffering to be gone, right? So, in that respect, in the Buddhist context, we only speak of compassion oriented towards others. So, when it comes to talking about self-compassion, we have to be careful what we mean by that, what others mean by that. I've seen some Tibetan lamas readily and thinking that self-compassion must be ngejung, must be the spirit of renunciation, because that's how we understand it to be. Compassion towards others is the compassion that kind of addressed to oneself is ngejung, right? So they thought self-compassion must be the same attitude of wishing for sufferings to be gone, except it is now directed towards oneself, and they kind of equated it with ngejung, whereas it is not like that in the Western psychology and therapy, psychotherapy, and other related disciplines. And then I think we will come across that later on down the road also, but so great compassion basically fulfills that criteria, except it is directed towards all sentient beings without exception. And also, I may say so, that compassion, great compassion, doesn't discriminate between the types of sufferings, the types of limitations, but rather it kind of pulls in all types of sufferings, all types of, if I may, even limitations, obstacles, limitations that may stand in the way of one's prospect for full awakening. So takes all of those into consideration and wishes the sentient beings, the entirety of sentient beings, or with that same strength of attitude, maybe be that directed to a single person, but capable of being expanded equally at the same time to every sentient being. So kind of extended to all sentient beings, related with all types of sufferings, and wishing them to be free from suffering. And then depending on the strength of one's great compassion, within great compassion, there can be difference in the strength, in the power, in the level of how developed it is, that it could I think take the form of a wish, an aspiration to eventually kind of a actual action oriented, but nonetheless it has to have those basic qualities for being a great compassion. So let's since I'm primarily speaking to you, you're all very familiar with these topics, and so I will not take much time. Maybe in the question and answer sessions, we'll come across topics of interest, mutual interest that we could address and share among ourselves. So without taking much time, I'll just move through the stanzas. The door to the path of the great beings, the great seal of the Mahayana, the seed of great awakening, I prostrate with devotion to great compassion. So here the author is, yes, beginning with an homage to the one of great compassion. It's Mahakarunikaya, the one with, so anyone who possesses this, or maybe his mind is primarily to the personification of great compassion in the Avalokiteshvara, or to the great compassion that is that abides in the continuum of all great Bodhisattvas and Buddhas. So he pays homage to that. Whoever is that privileged, that privileged and that great in possessing it, and then drawing inspiration from that compassion, is qualifying them in these ways. It's the draw to the path of the great beings. Now here, great beings would be practitioners in the great vehicle, the great seal of the Mahayana. Yeah, seal, kind of a trademark, right? The seed of great awakening. So here, the great awakening should be Changchup, the Buddhahood. I prostrate with devotion to great compassion. So all these qualities are something that great compassion fulfills. Draw to the path of the great beings. Draw in the sense that, of course, so many preparations, practices beforehand can be slowly but gradually leading to entering into the fold of the great practitioners, Mahayana practitioners. But at what point does it now kind of almost takes a definite twist in that trajectory, kind of becoming more definite in leading to the greater vehicle? That's definitely when one generates great compassion, and along with that, great loving kindness, because they virtually kind of are activated either actually or potentially at the same time. So there's no definite order between the two in terms of which comes first and which comes next. When we are thinking of loving kindness in the same tune as great compassion, except it is focusing on the aspect of joy and happiness. So in that respect, the wish for others to have, the wish for all sentient beings to have all kinds of joy and happiness is great loving kindness. And just as great compassion is that attitude of wishing all sentient beings of freedom from all types of sufferings and limitations, miseries. So, draw to the path of great being, not actually pointing at the point when one generates bodhicitta. That's when one would have already entered the fold of the great vehicles. But before then, some kind of a definite turn happens that's pointing to that, right? Otherwise, up until then, it was kind of a general process, kind of not sure where it would lead to. But then upon the time one generates great compassion, that's when it has now taken a very definite turn in the direction of the great vehicle. And I think this may be the reason why when we talk about the two broad instructions of generating bodhicitta, the one on the 7-point cause and effect, where we demarcate what are the causes, what are the effects in that so-called 7-point cause and effect instruction. Ordinarily, people may think that, oh, it must be. It's just general knowledge. The last one is bodhicitta. Since this is an instruction on generating bodhicitta, just the bodhicitta might be the effect there. All the rest might be the cause. But in Lamrim Chemo, Tsongkhapa is very, very clear, and he underscores this point that the so-called effect starts from great compassion, and all the rest before that. So that would be what so yeah, the first 4 steps in that, up to Yivongi Chamba, up to the cherishing love, the love that holds all sentient beings as cherishing and beloved. Not quite the same love as wishing others to have joy and happiness. That would fall in the category of great compassion, great love, loving kindness. But the love that takes the form of cherishing others, seeing others as cherishable, as cherished, as beloved, kind of as sense of friendliness and closeness, but even more than that, in seeing them as appealing, naturally appealing, naturally attracting, appealing to oneself. That's kind of a loving. That's the loving kindness being included in the list of the cause. And the 4th one, soon before great compassion. And then great compassion is called the effect. From then, the count of effects begin. So that out of the 7 points of cause and effect instruction, the first 4 are the cause, and the next 3 are the results. And I think there is a specific reason for that. Up until then, there's not so sure as to where this is going to result in. But once one has kind of generated enough strength to generate loving kindness, now the direction is ascertained. The direction of movement ahead into the greater fold, into the greater vehicle fold, is certain. So that's why the point of great compassion is counted as the very starting point of the effect. And then, yes, very often we say the point of generating great compassion is when the lineage, when one's great vehicle lineage is ascertained. I have difficulty conveying it fully in English, but what it says is rikseba, means the potential for entering, the potential for belonging to the fold of the great vehicle has now activated, now has become activated, now has become live with the generation of bodhicitta, with the generation of great compassion. We call that tekchengi rikseba. Tekchengi rikseba. Seba has the connotation of becoming active from having remained dormant. Now it has become active, and that activation results in now ascertaining one's lineage, one's, if you will, one's group of belonging. So it definitely marks a turn, a significant turn in the direction of the great vehicle. That's why I think that's called the door that kind of opens into this new trajectory in one's spiritual upbringing. The great seal of the Mahayana. So it's like when you have that, it's like now a seal has been put on oneself, on one's way of thinking, whatnot, that is sure to kind of contribute to the great vehicle. The seed of great awakening. Now here, great awakening is the Buddhahood. So the seed of Buddhahood, the actual qualities of Buddhahood kind of primarily comes from bodhicitta, but the rise of bodhicitta is inescapably connected with great compassion. It's like completely hinges on the cultivation of great compassion. And likewise, in Chandrakirti's homage in his text Madhyamika Avatara, in his entering the middle way, there too he extols great compassion along the lines of being seed, that of a germinating water, that of a ripened fruit, in relation to full awakening Buddhahood, right? So that's the seed. So it is quite interesting to see just for philosophical purpose, in the line of unbroken causation, where do you put the finger and say, yes, from here the cause for or the turn for great vehicle begins? Otherwise, for anything happening, there would be an unbroken chain of causation. It cannot be broken at all. For just about everything, there is an unbroken chain of causation, that could be traced back ad infinitum. So, like in the case of training in the 7 point cause and effect instruction, also there was an unbroken chain of causation, leading up to bodhicitta. But at what point do you say that now the cause, or rather the seed of awakening later on, yet at the same time, bodhicitta has commenced? So it's quite interesting, and I mean, there should be a way to identify that, because that's the way it is. But in terms of the actuality, there is no break in the flow of causation, one leading to the other. Anyway, then we move on to the next one. The mother who gives birth to all victorious ones, the essential wealth of the conqueror's children, the anonymous benefactor of all beings, may I be protected by great compassion. Yes, sometimes English is not obvious to me, although so it is not the same as reading Tibetan for me. So it's Gyaokunji Gejeyum. So it says that it is the mother who gives birth to all victorious ones, to all the Buddhas, right? To all the Buddhas. It's Geje, the birthing mother, right? The mother who gives birth to all the Buddhas. Again, in the same case as it is the door to the great vehicle, as it is the great seal of the Mahayana, right? And also it is the seed of great awakening, because the starting point from where a kind of a sure direction, a definite direction towards the Buddhahood, mediated by being Bodhisattva, starts with great compassion. Now here we have to be very clear about great compassion, right? Earlier we said great compassion in terms of its focus, its range of focus. It doesn't exclude any sentient being. It includes all the sentient beings. And then in terms of the sufferings that it wishes them to be free from, again, it is not at a particular given time. It could be pronounced in one way or the other, but in spirit, it is kind of inclusive of all types of limitations. And by that, I feel comfortable saying it includes even what we might not ordinarily consider as obvious suffering. Of course, not the suffering of pain, not just the suffering of pain, not just the suffering of change, not even just the suffering of the pervasive conditioning, but even cognitive obscurations. I think it may include in there, because what it is aspiring for is aspiring for others to be fully awakened, and in that regard, I think I'm inclined more to say that it is not making any discrimination that some could just do with liberation, the others should be led to enlightenment. It aims for everyone to be fully awakened, and towards that end, it sees the need for oneself to be awakened first. So when it comes to the sufferings or the unwanted situation that it wishes for others to be freed from, again, that is as comprehensive, as exhaustive, as comprehensive. Nothing is left out. So I think I came across in Lamrim Shemo also kind of being very specific about these points when it deals with great compassion. So and towards achieving that goal that is so dear to the Bodhisattvas, they, as much as they cherish that goal and wish for them to be successful in this, likewise, as much they should be cherishing, they should be really guarding their essential, precious wealth in great compassion. And eventually, bodhicitta also. But until then, even before that, they should really cherish great compassion that really now has launched them on a very, wonderful, place that has all those promises. Yet at the same time, in the initial stages, still not free from the risk or danger of losing it or losing its strength. So that's like Nyingin Norbu. In the Tibetan, it is said Nyingin Norbu is like the heart treasure. In English, it says essential wealth. But in Tibetan, it is the heart treasure of all the Bodhisattvas. The core treasure, the treasure that really lies at the very core of just about all other treasures, all other belongings or treasures they may have. But at the core of it lies great compassion. And it is quite understandable. That kind of great compassion really holds everything else in place, everything else that Bodhisattvas cherish and they aspire to attain. The key lies in that. So that's how it is called the heart treasure, the heart wealth of the Bodhisattvas, because everything hinges in it, and that's the reason why I think it is quoted in Lamrim Chemo, a sutra called Che Yang Dabar Duba, which is some Yukta Dharma, Sangani or something. If I restore it in Sanskrit, but basically it is the sutra encompassing all dharmas, the sutra that brings together all dharmas. In that, it says that bodhisattvas do not need to learn much. They do not need to study much. They just need to focus on one. And when they do that, then everything else will fall in their palm. And that is great compassion. It says that when you have the great compassion, then all of the going about, up and about, being so busy with the service, in the service of others, comes about. Just as with the sunrise, everyone would be up and about and doing things, busy. Likewise, it is the one thing in the bodhisattvas that kind of is the heart of their enthusiasm in really going about in serving others. Likewise, it likens the great compassion to the life organ, to the life force of a being. With that, then all the other organs, all the other biological faculties would be functioning. Without that, all of them will be dead. So is the case with great compassion, that once you have that, in the case of the bodhisattvas, then all of the associated practices would either be there or would come about. Everything kind of hinges in it. And that the bodhisattvas are aware, and they kind of really treasure and hold that, keep guard of that, and develop that. So these words, as I said earlier, these are not just kind of casual wordings, but they're kind of really embedded with meaning. And then Dokunji Madishe, the anonymous benefactor of all beings. I hope it conveys the meaning here in Tibetan, which is like it's almost like the unsolicited, the unsolicited yet all giving friend, benefactor of all sentient beings. Everyone is close to the bodhisattva, to the bodhisattva's heart. It's not that someone is far, someone is near. Irrespective of whether the bodhisattva knows that person or not, there's no such thing that and someone is kind of out of touch out of touch from his care, out of reach of his care, of his concern. But everyone is dear to him. So to them, the bodhisattva becomes the other term, Tibetan term, the direct translation of this so-called madi is stranger, unfamiliar. One who may be stranger to others, yet not quite so, from his or her way of relating to others. But from the others, from the point of view of the others, he may be a total stranger, right? But the bodhisattvas, to them, no one is stranger, and their heart is as close to everyone. So to others, to everyone, he is the unquestioned, the unquestioned yet unsolicited benefactor, there at all times. So from these, it becomes quite, I mean, it gives some sense of what a bodhisattva might be walking around with, what the bodhisattva might, what being bodhisattva might feel like. I mean, it's such a richness and kind of spaciousness, kind of a wonderful kind of sense of what do you call sense of being, sense of carrying oneself around in relation to others. So may I be protected by great compassion with those qualities, right? And then the third one says, yeah, prostrating to it alone encompasses making prostrations and offerings to all the victorious ones and their children. I praise great compassion. Yeah, this reminds me of a sutra where Buddha extols the Bodhisattva in training, the Buddha in training, which is Bodhisattvas, as saying that they are more precious. They deserve more care, more respect than the Buddhas, than the fully awakened ones. And that may be because they are like the budding Buddhas, Buddhas in making, with those wonderful qualities, fresh and being nurtured and kind of guarded and whatnot. So they are the ones who deserve the most care and most respect as well. How much of a task it takes, attention it takes for them to kind of carry along. And thus it says that that the crescent moon, the Bodhisattvas are like crescent moon compared to the full moon of the Buddhas. And the crescent moon, like Bodhisattvas, they deserve and they earn more of our respect compared to the Buddhas. Because in a way, when you respect the Bodhisattvas, then you automatically respect Buddhas. But when you exclusively respect Buddhas, then that's not the same thing. And that's, they're kind of making this point through these metaphors and whatnot, in making the point that the time of Bodhisattva is very precious and also deserving of great care and respect. So, and plus everything Buddha kind of is grounded and rooted in the great compassion, right? It's like everything Buddha and associated qualities, activities, all of those kind of taper down to the initial point of great compassion, which is almost like the gem that kind of holds all of them in place, and from which all of these spring up. So prostrating to it alone encompasses making prostrations and offerings to all the victorious ones and their children. Very often when we speak of these qualities in relation to great compassion, one automatically wonders, how does it sit with bodhicitta? How does it compare with bodhicitta? Whatnot? So it kind of helps us kind of expand our understanding and the significance, the ramifications, the impact of great compassion. In that, from there, the commencement of that revolution, if you will, of that altruistic revolution kind of sparks up. By the time bodhicitta is developed, it's already quite a while before one has been in it. But the point of generating great compassion kind of really is so delicate and so crucial. So as great as bodhicitta is, but compared with great compassion, there are areas where one could kind of make a distinction between the two in terms of their impact and their what do you call dynamics, etc. So then we move on to stanza 4. I praise you, great compassion, the unrivaled ultimate root, the cause and condition from which Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are born. I think in your copy, the author, the translator leaves out Buddha. I think partly it may have to do with how it appears in Tibetan. In Tibetan it says Nyen Rang Sangye. So it's like Rang Sangye is sometimes the full term used for referring to solitary realizers. But at the same time, when we say Nyen Rang, and then that captures that. Nyen Rang is almost like a contracted full way of referring to Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. And then if you have Sangye after that, then that should be reserved for the Buddhas. But other than that, from the very concept also, it is very clear. This is in reference to, again, the homage stanza in Acharya Chandrakirti's Entering the Middle Way, where he extols the great compassion by drawing a line of the causal sequence, causal order among Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas. So it is in that line that the Pratyeka Buddhas, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas arise from, they come about from Buddha. The Buddha in turn comes from Bodhisattvas. And thus, beginning with Bodhisattva, followed by Buddhas and the Pratyeka Buddhas and Shravakas, they in turn are originating from great compassion that gives rise to Bodhisattvas, and Bodhisattvas in turn to the Buddhas, and from the teachings and the guidance that Buddhas give, then Pratyeka Buddhas and Shravakas come about. So again, what's that in Tibetan? Nyarang Sanje Changsen Nam Kangle Tumbe Tukeni Tartu Sawatumeba. So even in relation to Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, great compassion has a great significance in being the very source of the causes, far and immediate, that leads to the birth of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. So here, when we speak of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, although there is no particular order between the two, but the two comes from the Buddhas teaching them. But the Buddhas necessarily, for someone to be Buddha, they have to be necessarily be preceded by a Bodhisattva. Whereas that's not the case in relation to Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. But for the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, they have to have a Buddha to receive teachings from, to receive guidance from. And for Buddhas, every Buddha has to have a Bodhisattva lifetime or Bodhisattva period to have preceded. So it's along that line also, although there is another reason also. But here we could just emphasize this. Although in terms of individual Buddhas, one could have a Buddha who taught and under whom some Bodhisattvas appeared, some Bodhisattvas developed and whatnot. But in general, that particular Buddha should have a Bodhisattva preceding it. Whereas, so it is along that line. And although in the scripture, it also speaks of how Bodhisattvas not belonging to the same continuum, external Bodhisattvas also play a role in the birth, in the growth of Buddhas. So there are accounts of how Manjushri plays this role in being the instigator, in being the driver, in pushing Bodhisattvas along their path, who eventually becomes Buddhas, like that. So that's another aspect by which this case is made, but more strongly in case of how chronologically, or if you will, biologically, from the Buddhist perspective, every Buddha has to be preceded by a Bodhisattva. So in the English text, it says, "I praise you, great compassion, the unrivaled, ultimate root, the cause and condition," right? As though we are referring to two different things: the ultimate, the unrivaled ultimate root, the cause and condition. If that's how it comes across, then that's not the intention here. They are to form one singular quality. So in Tibetan, it says, "Gyujenje Tartuk Tsawa," the root ultimate, the unrivaled, the root and ultimate cause and condition, giving rise to Bodhisattvas, Buddhas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and Shravakas. So this thing about unrivaled, ultimate, right, root, they all should be converging in qualifying the cause and condition. Then it will be in line with the Tibetan. Instead of saying it says the ultimate root, the unrivaled ultimate root on the one hand, and the cause and condition, not like that. Although I think in the way it is grammatically arranged, that's exactly how it should come across. But I was wondering. Let's push through one more, the fifth one. This is almost directly, right? Not the exact word in word, but exact direct one, but one complete notion in terms of praising great compassion. And I think what do you call this? This is like a metaphor. I think, yeah, this is a metaphor where you liken a great compassion, to where you liken great compassion to the ripened fruit in terms of its final, in terms of its final growth, development, and a ripened fruit ready for people to benefit from, to consume, to enjoy, would have to go through the stages of being a seed, and then a sapling, etc., for which right, they have to go through these stages of being in the initial stage and the interim and finally the resultant state, for which water, seed, even in terms of the full fruition, fruiting stage also, it has to be, if it is ripened, then it makes a big difference. Merely fruiting is not enough. So in terms of coming to that stage of being readily available for people to enjoy, it has to go through those stages. And likewise, great compassion plays the role, all those three roles in harvesting, in harvesting in the harvest of the victorious ones, in the harvest of the Buddhas. And in the case of great compassion singly can stand for all those three, whereas in the case of the example that of a harvesting fruit, all those roles are played separately by different elements, like a seed and water and the ripening. Whereas in the case of the Buddhas, this great compassion singly can uh, carry out those roles in relation, in respect to generating the harvest of the great awakened beings. So I think we will break here for 10 minutes, and at 6:41 we will meet again. In the stanza 5, I think even in the note on that, in your copy, it leaves out the mention of seed in the translation of Chandrakirti's homage stanza. And then also it leaves out the mention of ripened in relation to the fruit. That's very crucial. That's very crucial because it gives a hypothetical situation of where, when somebody becomes a Buddha and doesn't have someone becomes fully awakened but doesn't have full great compassion, then they wouldn't be available to sentient beings. They wouldn't be inspired to serve sentient beings. Likewise is the case with fruit. Even if the process has led to the fruition or the fruiting season, but so long as the fruit is unripe, people cannot still cannot enjoy it. It's still not yet ready to serve people. Likewise is the case with the fruit of Buddhahood. The reason why Buddhas serve sentient beings is because of the force of great compassion intact in them, and even at that stage. And thus, this mention about ripened is very important. I think it was missing in the translation, in the note, I think, even in the translation itself, as well as maybe in the note. In the note where Jose Cabezon gives the translation of this, of the relevant stanza from the entering into the middle way, he leaves out the mention of seed, I think. Okay, anyway, so that must have been just a simple omission, not intentional, but that's very significant. And in the Tibetan, it definitely mentions that. And then I remember very clearly at the Abbey, you have at the entrance of the hall, just where you have the Kuan Yin, you have that beautiful rendition of this particular stanza. And I have always wondered, and I think I have mentioned it to Venerable also one time. There are just 3 lines. Why not make it into 4? I don't know, how would that be? Because in the text itself it is 4 lines, but there, I think, if I remember clearly, I felt little unusual and asked, I think brought it up with Venerable Sultan Chodronla, that how come there's only 3 lines there? Why not 4th? I mean, all the text carries this and expresses in four lines, a full stanza. Why it is not complete there? Anyway, so and in the Tibetan, I think in the translation also, translation in the note also, it captures it. In the Tibetan, there's this mention, is emphasis of how great compassion singly can represent all these different elements that are required in ripening fruit. Whereas in the case of generating Buddhahood and generating a Buddha, just great compassion singly serves that purpose. So there is this emphasis on it, on that aspect. Consider ni, there's ni. Like in the case of Chue Ni, which means the reality, the very reality. Likewise, the compassion itself. Okay, then we can move on to stanza 6. I praise you, great compassion, whose defining characteristics is the desire to protect all aged mother sentient beings from the subtle and gross fears of samsara and nirvana. It comes across very strange in English when you say all aged mother sentient beings. In Tibetan, when we use the term mage, we hardly pay attention to that agedness part of it. We would just think of that as a way of kind of making up for the syntax to kind of come it across. Although if needed, one could make a case for that, saying the sentient beings have been our mothers, not just for one time, for innumerable times, right? Countless times. So that kind of counts for their agedness. But it's not saying that every sentient being is aged. But in serving as our mother, they could be seen as aged in that their serving as mother is not just once and twice, but countless. Although this is the first time I'm making a case for this term in English. I have never felt the need of explaining why I call it Magen, because nobody would ever pay attention to it, because just knowing them as mother is enough, irrespective of what age level they are. But yeah, in the translation, it is spelled out, and I could not take it away because the term does have that addition there, Magen. So in English, it kind of really stands out. If we were to write it in Tibetan, it wouldn't be noticed even. It would be seen as equally calling them as mothers. Yeah, I almost took it away, and then I said, no, it's there in Tibetan. So if one has to make case for that, then I think that would be how I would make, in that it suggests how they're serving as our mothers is not just once or twice, but countless times, right? Yeah, speaking of this, aged motherhood, we need to tackle this topic of reincarnation, of life after life. And I don't think it is a problem there at the Abbey, but at the same time, individually, one has to really tackle this. Yeah, one has to really tackle this, and should be kind of equipped with one's own resources of how to make the case for it. Because if you look around, the evidence is abundant, and not just today, tomorrow, or yesterday, but from ages. And then with the admission of the scientists also, including the one who wrote that book called Erasing Death, Dr. Sam Parnia, who is not just a physician, MD, but also a scientist, hardcore, hard-nosed scientist. Just as we could be called hard-nosed Geshes. Yeah, sometimes nobody else will be as hard-nosed as the Geshes. Okay, so yeah, so it is important to really tackle this. It should not be just kept under the rug. because yeah, one has to deal with it with one's perspective. And as I said earlier, it is not because it's not that talked about and not that openly acknowledged, not because there is no evidence for it. There's no evidence, no evidence pointing to it, no evidence backing it, there is no, what do you call, more, no ground for acknowledging it. It's not because of that. It's just because it is not the trend in the open society. And but when we think of individual lives, when at any point someone kind of takes the courage to bring it up, then one could see how that very easily becomes the talk of the occasion. There's so many people who would have so many things to share, irrespective of whether their own tradition supports that or not. And there is no dearth of information, no dearth of evidence for that, even to this day. Just yesterday, where was this? In Baltimore, there was a lady who was clinically dead after having had heart attack, cardiac arrest, after maybe 2 months of, I think, losing those clinical signs of life, and then eventually cardiac arrest, and then after continued resuscitation, very hard, deep compression, she was revived after 45 minutes. But luckily in her case, she didn't have any brain damage. Didn't have to go through those process of really, what do you call that? Rehabilitation, therapy, rehab. And this is particularly what Dr. Sampania, in his recent book the latest book, I think, I suppose, Erasing Death, where he speaks of how new scientific discoveries are happening that requires new ways of defining the boundary of death, that the general clinical definition of death no more seems to hold water, in that if that were considered to be the actual stage of death, then where there would be no, I mean, of course, even by that standard also, there would be pretty much a flatline, EEG flatline kind of a state, because brain activity would have stopped, no blood flow is going there, no heartbeat, right? No breathing, of course, long before that. None of that is there. But still, after 4 or 5 hours, people could be revived through resuscitation. And now the resuscitation technique has taken a whole new innovative method in what they are calling deep, very hard, deep compression, etc., etc. But it is a totally, what would have been off limit kind of a method if that had been practiced or insisted on before. But now, even with not that wide open acceptance, doctors are taking chance. And yes, one of the doctors was asked, why didn't you give up? I didn't give up because you didn't give up. That was the answer. I kind of found it very strange, but still, he says that I didn't give up because you didn't give up, and you didn't want to go because you want to live. You have all the right to live. I didn't give up because you didn't give up. I mean, what else could they say? But in how they pushed to kind of still try heart deep compassion, even at that stage of some 45 minutes of unquestioned clinical death, that would have been a problematic thing. But luckily, she survived, and they have an evidence showing the worth of it. Yeah, in this regard, evidence, there is no dearth of evidence. And also, once we accept that, then so many of the things, aspects of life, could be explained. Otherwise, so many of them would have to be just left untouched and just say, I don't know, we don't know. Whereas once we bring life after life into consideration, then suddenly just about all of the dots connect. And then one thing to remember is, in this whole life, from beginning till end, our consciousness do not leave us. Or even if it may or may not be in the body, it would be somewhere else that people, when they come back, they relate stories about it. So it seems like, at least from the birth till death, we as a being is never separated from our consciousness. There may be a difference in terms of how consciously conscious we may be at any given particular time, but in terms of any sign of a consciousness, it never seems to be severed. Not necessarily have to be in the same body, because very often people report out-of-body experiences when their usual body would have been considered dead and without life. But still, when they are resuscitated, or in some ways, somehow they are lucky enough to be brought back to life, at the amazement of the doctors, at the bewilderment of the doctors and others in the operation theater or whatnot, when they come back, they would have a hard time in explaining the situation that they cannot deny, because in what they report back, in what they had seen, what they had gone through, seems to tally with what actually had happened so privately to the doctors in that particular scenario. And then from a Buddhist perspective, the element of disposition, bhakcha, the element of disposition, bhakcha, of how people differ in their disposition, in what they carry deep down in terms of a potential, and what, when coming in contact with the conducive conditions, how, when they activate, how that is expressed in such a way that one would have really hard time tracing it to any kind of a happening or situation, scenario, incident in this life. Sometimes the contrast in terms of the dispositions is so great that even within the so-called identical twins, now I'm calling them so-called identical twins, because there has been a discovery of how the so-called identical twins born from one zygote could also have different DNA, not just environmental things, but even DNA. This was a recent thing. So irrespective of that, they come out very different in terms of their mental life, mental capacity, mental dispositions. Although outwardly, with the DNAs, whatnot, they may be very similar. So from a Buddhist perspective, I mean, of course, you already know, but I will just share some. We have these practices associated with bodhicitta, where there are certain practices by which you can strengthen the bodhicitta in this life, and then other practices that are geared towards remembering bodhicitta and retaining bodhicitta and keeping the strength of the bodhicitta in the next life, right? You already know that. There are specified practices geared towards that, by which one could preserve, maintain, nurture bodhicitta in this life, and then other set. I think that's what is called the Kabechushi, Naguchushi, maybe the four positive dharmas and the four negative dharmas, I think. And then there are stories of how Shariputra was carrying a similar disposition, but with regard to the wisdom of understanding of emptiness. That when before he joined the fold of the Buddha, he was a student under a non-Buddhist master, together with Mangalayana. And then they came across, in the same town, they came across, I think it was Ashwajit Dadul. Ashwajit Dadul, someone who among the followers of, among the disciples of the Buddha was very, very known for his Vinaya practice. So he was so well disciplined and well so gentle in his behavior and whatnot, that the mere sight would be so so difficult to avoid, that people would be so drawn by the mere sight of his way of carrying himself, not in an artificial way, but in a very real meaning, kind of well, focused way. So when I wonder if you have, I don't think you have watched as a group. Have you watched some 56 episodes of Buddha, a TV series with some 56 episodes produced in India? For a while, it was available on Netflix. I watched it maybe 3 times, 2 times on my iPhone. And one time during the peak of pandemic, that really helped me get through it. And get through it in a very, very profound, beneficial way. I mean, I had no time thinking about the pandemic. I was just lost into my thoughts of the past. And while I was watching it, it's like it didn't take time to kind of transport me into that area, into that time. Oh, it was so good. So I watched this 3 times. Sometimes it's so irresistible that I would watch 3 episodes at it. Oh, I can tell you, when I was watching it for the first time, and when I arrived at the point when Buddha would attain awakening, enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, the next morning when I rise up and went to office, I kind of felt like I was so alive with that experience, and I was kind of looking around and almost slipping into saying, did you know Buddha attained enlightenment? I mean, although I did fall short of saying this, express this, but I was carrying that feeling within me. It was so wonderful, even 2-3 days after that. So in that movie, in that TV series called The Buddha, it is so well done. They have put in so much care. Oh, the choreography, all of that is so beautiful, so beautiful. And in terms of the message and the teachings and the lyrics, whatnot, it is quite authentic. And they seem to have drawn it from so many different traditions: Chinese, Tibetan, Pali, all of those. It was quite evident. So anyway, in one of the episodes, there was this Ashwajit, the well disciplined, morally acclaimed disciple of the Buddha, making his arms round all by himself. And he would face with people kind of rejecting to give him any alms, even kind of saying bad things in his face, and would pour water, just mere water, in his baking alms ball, baking ball, and that too they wouldn't pour it decently, but rather kind of splash it so that his rose will be wet. But still, he would say, "Thank you. May you be happy by this merit. May you be happy." Something like that. He would kind of genuinely, meaningfully, intentionally say that, and that would be observed by Shariputra. I think it was Shariputra. Yeah, Shariputra. Mangalyaan was not with him, although they were not yet Buddha's followers. So then he would approach him and then said, "How come? Who is your master? I have seen you behave this way," and that too very sincerely, in the face of such a rejection, such a mistreatment. But still, you were so poised, so into yourself, and even had the presence of saying these good things in return. Who is your teacher? What does he teach? Then he would tell that Gautama, Buddha, is his teacher, and his teaching, the teaching that he shares with him, is what is called the essence of dependent origination, the 4-line, which in Sanskrit is ye dharma hetu prabhava hetun tesham tathagato hevadat tesham chayo nirodak emamvade mahashamanai swa, which basically kind of touches on the 4 noble truths. But the mere mention of that was enough. Mere mention of the causal relationship, as well as not just casual causal relationship, but rather causal relationship in the sense of how everything takes for its cause, for it to generate, or it to be generated, and that cause has to have that potential, not just any cause, anything, by the way, as something along that line. Basically, kind of drawing on the 4 noble truths, on those 2 sets of causation. The mere mention of that was enough for his disposition from past life about emptiness and subtle dependent origination to be activated. Right then and there, he was kind of ecstatic, and he would run back and calling Mangalyaan, saying, "Mangalyaan!" He would be like his spiritual brother under the same teacher. Mangalyaan, come! I have found our teacher now. I have found our long-awaited teacher. That I found his disciple who shared this. We must go. So that's how they would spread the word among their disciples, and then they would collectively go to their master and seek for his permission to leave his fold and then go to Gautama, join Gautama. But this teacher himself was very great, very big-hearted, and he would once himself wonder what Gautama's teaching might be like. So Ashwajit shares with him, with Shariputra, that Gautama teaches from his experience. Everything he teaches is rooted in his experience, in his actual experience, like that. So that's how even in the scriptures also they recount this particular episode in connection with how bodhicitta, of course, when we receive bodhisattva vow, we receive it not just for one life, we really receive it until enlightenment. So technically, one would be carrying it if one has it intact, even without knowing that that's what one has with oneself. In some cases, mere mention would kind of really generate this inspiration. Be really kind of arousing the feeling carrying from before. So from a Buddhist perspective, we speak of those, and in this regard, the element of disposition, and which, without any sense of actual remembrance of a particular situation or not, we all are what do you call, witness to how people along the way respond to things different, and how sometimes they become so transformative. That would be like meeting their own dharma, own long what do you call, possessed dharma deep within them that has been waiting to be activated. But other than that, I have something else to share with regard to this topic, because this is important. It cannot be just left under rug or undiscussed. I have no idea how open you are discussing it, because it needs to be tackled, and each one of us has to be equipped for one's own individual spiritual integrity, whatnot, but also for showing path to others, sharing those people who are interested in it, because the evidence is really overwhelming. But then let's listen to what kids have to say. They do not what do you call, deceive. They do not tell a lie. They are just so innocent in sharing what they go through. So I came across this news feed where somebody puts a question and waits for people to respond. And I'll just read 2-3 of the stories and then move back, okay? Now I have found my place. Earlier I was kind of being very, very formal. Now the ice is broken. I'm back to my own being. So the question was, the question was addressed to the parents, and it says, "Parents, what spooky past life memory did your kid utter?" That was the question thrown in the media, and the response was interesting. So I haven't really what do you call, prepared for this. I just happen to have this ready on my iPhone, so I'm just opening it. So I may just look at 1-2 of them, not necessarily choosing the best ones among them. So among the responses, here are some of the top voted and best comments, which may make the hair on the back of your neck stand out. So if the first one is, it says, back pre-pandemic, I was watching my friend's then 3-year-old back pre-pandemic, I was watching my friend's then 3-year-old for her. And he saw a big military ship, and he got this kind of far away look and said, I remember when my boat sank there were so many sharks. This 3-year-old, all of a sudden, casually, right? By seeing this condition, by meeting with this condition of seeing a big military ship, it kind of activated what he had remembered. And he says, I remember when my boat sank, there were so many sharks. Number 2, when I was very young and still unable to string sentences together, my mom and I were sitting at the dining room table. She was crying, and I comforted my mother by telling her without any babbling or hesitation, it's okay, I used to be your great grandmother, I'll take care of you, unquote. Yeah, it is interesting to read the response from the mother. So in the case of the first one, where the 3-year-old said, I remember when my boat sank and there were so many sharks, the lady was saying, I said, what? He blinked and said, what? And then started asking questions about the boat. I mentioned it to my friend and she said, yeah, he does that sometimes. So that was for the first one. For the second one, right, there the person who was sharing is saying, I have no memory of this, and my mom said I went back to my baby-like talk immediately afterward. So the person who was sharing this was saying, I have no memory of this, and my mom said that I went back to my baby-like talk immediately afterward. She stopped crying, probably because it scared the shit out of her. Sorry. I wasn't looking ahead. Just so that's what I meant. I didn't prepare. Okay, I just know it is there. Okay, maybe the last one, third one. So these are kids, 3-year-old kids. Where would they know these terms in the first hand, and what would they gain from saying this? And then they kind of saying very matter-of-factly, casually, out of the blue. They should have a reason. There should be a source for that. And then many of these things have been verified. Okay, now let's see. We are trying our luck. I'm just going by 1, 2, 3. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be the best one. The third one, okay? Quote, unquote. Okay. I used to watch my nephew when he was about 3 or 4. One day he was at my house and pointed to a magnet of Arizona. It had a picture of the desert, desert with rock formations. Kid pointed at it and asked where it was. He said he used to live by red rocks like that with his first family. First he would ask where that was, and he himself would say that he used to live by red rocks like that with his first family. So now the reaction here. The first family, right, all had straight dark hair. His is blonde and curly. And that he had a mom, a dad, and a brother. That is until he went too far into the desert, too close to dark, and got eaten by not dogs, not wolves, but smaller something. I said, coyotes. And he kind of mouthed the word and said, oh, that's what you call them? Then he was sad and didn't want to talk about it anymore. So we had lunch, and that was the first and last time he mentioned it. So this should do, right? Do you want one more, or should we move? One more. Okay. Okay, you get to choose which number. No, we already did 4, 5. 8. Okay, 8. Good. That's so good. Okay. 8, quote unquote. When our son was maybe 3 or 4, he described his life as a ballerina on stage. From the lights to the music to the applause. His next words chilled me to the bone. I was at a party on a boat and I fell into the water. Then, poof, I was here. Then the mother saying, I asked him to relate the story when his father came back from a business trip a couple weeks later, and it was identical. But after that, he never discussed this again. I didn't want to go there, he said. Okay. Thank you. This came handy. I just left it there. So I lost track. Where were we? Okay. One more stanza. Let's. We finished number 6. No, not number 6. Okay. So now we look at number 6, right?
The last line, Geshe.
Oh, yeah. I praise you, great compassion, whose defining characteristic is the desire to protect all aged mother sentient beings from subtle and gross fears of samsara and nirvana. So again, it is defining great compassion in the light of a wish or desire for others to be freed from suffering, misery, something unwanted, fears, etc. I chose to substitute the mention of what was that? Existence and pacification. That was so, I mean, for us, it will be familiar. It will be, otherwise for others, if you say fear of existence, fear of pacification, what in the world would that mean? It's better to say samsara and nirvana. And then somewhere down, it again uses the term some existence, almost sounding like existence is something to be shunned. And that's very misleading. We do not want to go out of existence. Nor can we. But we want to get out of samsara. Right? And samsara is sometimes, the Tibetan term is sipa, and they use the term existence. That's the same term they use for the 10th link in the dependent origination. There again, they use the term existence. That's so what do you call? Pardon? Misleading. Okay, so from the subtle and gross fears of samsara and nirvana. So this is looking at nirvana from the Bodhisattvas perspective. For them, individual liberation is something to be really, really scared of. Something that they have to pay extra attention to be not attracted to be not drawn into. So there is actual fear for Bodhisattvas. For some of us, we may think like, oh, once I hit nirvana, I would just go into big, relaxed slumber. But no, for the Bodhisattvas, that is the worst nightmare. Because that could be attractive and that could really get them stuck. And that's why not only samsara is fearful, but nirvana is fearful. But this is not to say that nirvana in general is fearful, something to be feared about. Particularly someone pursuing individual liberation, of course, with compassion, etc., towards everyone without exception, but just shy of taking the responsibility of really kind of really volunteering and sacrificing one's own individual liberation for the sake of others. That was just not forthcoming. Otherwise, all of the compassion, not great compassion, but compassion, and that too extended to every sentient being without exception, is all there. So, yeah, the subtle and gross fears of samsara, not only samsara, but of nirvana. These are considered to be two extremes of existing for a bodhisattva. And the state that is free from these two extremes would be full awakening, neither reeling in samsara oneself, because that would weaken one's capacity of helping out others, but at the same time, not falling into the samsara of, not falling into the other extreme of nirvanic complacency. Or you could call nirvanic, I don't know, no nirvanic. No, I don't want to use any terms here. But yeah, it is considered to be another extreme and to be avoided. And the freedom from these two extremes, like we speak of two extremes in the light of pursuing Madhyamika perspective, likewise, in the ideal that the Bodhisattvas are pursuing, they pursue it by trying to avoid the two extremes, one that of samsara, another that of nirvana. And the freedom from that would be to push for full awakening. So these are, yeah, real fears. If we put ourselves in the shoes of the Bodhisattvas and begin to look at, yes, particularly the nirvana could be really something really freaking the Bodhisattvas. Okay, I guess I will stop it here for questions and answers. And then I think that is the plan, right? Yeah, we'll have the next half an hour for sharing, not necessarily direct all questions to me. We could share the honors of asking and answering among ourselves. So we can use the half hour, maybe close to half hour, so that we have enough time for the concluding prayers and any announcements that you may have. Okay, I think so we are done with stanza 6.
Geshe, thank
Yes.
you. In verse 4, you made the comment, there are accounts of how Manjushri plays the role of pushing bodhisattvas along the path.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that? Do you remember accounts of this?
I have seen this in Tsongkhapa's commentary on, by now you may have a copy in Tsongkhapa's commentary on entering into the middle way, that the translation of which has just recently come out through Geshe Tupten Jibala, called Illuminating the Intent. Yeah, there around the topic of how bodhisattvas and buddhas are originating from the in particular how bodhisattvas are the cause of the Buddhas. It gives two lines of reasoning. One along the chronological line, where their own being, right, for a Buddha, for someone to become Buddha, they would have to be preceded by their being bodhisattvas early on. So I don't know what you call that, by their own same line of personal continuum. And then the other is for a Buddha, someone external to them, someone belonging to a different, someone external to them, someone belonging to yet another mental continuum, say in this case, Manjushri, a bodhisattva, not yet Buddha himself, but bodhisattva, or maybe, in the context, they would have to be bodhisattva, who would motivate others on their path, and they in turn proceed to becoming Buddha. Maybe even before Manjushri himself becomes Buddha, or together, or after him, but nonetheless, a Buddha, the relationship between a Buddha and a bodhisattva, not sharing the same mental continuum, yet serving this relationship of the bodhisattva being the cause and the Buddha, and a Buddha being the result. So in that respect, some sutra has been quoted there. So if you have access to and likewise, this kind of a episode should be quite prevalent in the lives of several Buddhas during their time of bodhisattva training. There could be so many other external beings who would be playing the role of a sangha, of a reliable sangha, of a well-meaning, really well-meaning, capable, effective bodhisattva in kind of pushing them along the path and facilitating their progress along the path.
So Geshe, when we get to the point here when you were talking about great compassion is the starting point to generating the great vehicle to really get into what stepping into that type of motivation. Can you talk more about the Mahayana vehicle? And so much for my day is I know that the compassion is sometimes authentic, mostly fabricated to the level in which great compassion arises in the mind. Fabrication, similitude, pretending, I usually fall into personal distress far too easily when I try to cultivate compassion. So can you talk about just how to how to work with the practice to cultivate such a profound state of mind, and how to avoid minimizing one's own response to the suffering of the world, yet not fall into all sorts of, suffering yourself, because the similitude is not that, is good, but not that powerful.
I think you're asking the wrong person the question. Yeah, one thing about how to go about training is very clearly mentioned in the Bodhicharvatara, where it says that the practices, the high-profile practices of bodhisattvas of great measure, they cannot be cultivated right away. One has to kind of move in small steps towards them, but steps that one has to be persistent on. And then eventually one would actually come when what one had once thought to be almost impossible would be so easy coming. But in the meantime, one has to have an aspiration towards that, even in the sense, even in the form of kind of putting on one's head out of respect those texts which deal with those topics and saying, this is so far away from me, but may I be able to do that. So including making such physical gesture together with a mental aspiration and mental mental inspiration to be able to do that. But in the meantime, not to lose sight of doing the small steps, the small push, not just staying put where one is and kind of really maintaining the comfort zone and not budging. No, that's not how to go about. One should be kind of pushing the edge a little bit, but to the extent one can, but nonetheless pushing the edge. And then keep going. Eventually, one would kind of inch into that so-called so difficult to practice. And then when that happens, one's body, mind would be so cooperative. They would have grown, developed, matured to that level. And thus, the practice would not be any difficult. And that's the time when one would have to execute it, because there will be nothing concerning it. But nonetheless, one has earned it through the small steps. So when we hear of so difficult practices of bodhisattvas, of sacrifices, and etc., one would have to have a right perspective towards it. And Bodhicharvatara really nails down on that in terms of how to go about it. If you want to look at that particular context, it is in chapter 7 on perseverance. Yeah, if you now these days we have so many searchable copies of them that if you search, you may remember very clearly. We have come across this so many times. The section where it speaks of the Bodhisattva's practice of giving up their lives, and where it says that though that's one of the practices that Bodhisattvas would and should uphold, but not until they have trained in seeing their body as something as simple as, by which they would have developed this perception to their body as nothing but like a piece of a vegetable. So just around that, you will find the question raised following it, saying, how can this be practiced? This is so difficult. And he is saying, no, any of the practices that you do should be in an integrated way, where your body, mind, and everything is cooperating, with nothing concerning it and limiting its effectiveness, its integrity. But nonetheless, one has to make the small steps to eventually arrive at that. And when it does, it will be as easy as it used to be to just give away a penny to someone. So is the case with great compassion. Yeah, in regard to great compassion, in Lamrim Chemo, in Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chemo, he really underscores a point. He's saying, just sitting general and saying, may all sentient beings be happy, may they be free from suffering, in a very generic way, that's not going to get anywhere. He really takes time in mentioning it, saying that's not the way to train, because when you train like this, then when you are confronted with the actual situation, all of your efforts would come to nothing, would fall through, because one has not trained properly. And by proper, he meant really dissecting people into those groups and really taking time in kind of honing up one's compassionate perspective towards them in almost like a factual, real state of being, where you actually have an actual situation of really something that's kind of pinching you to the heart, right? Kind of something that you cannot deny having happened, and now kind of rise to the occasion and say, confront it, come up with as much of a reasoning, all of those you can, and then kind of convince your mind and see if it listens to it, if it really kind of passes its evaluation and whatnot, and then in the face of that, kind of see if now eventually it kind of gets it, and now it's able to kind of not deny the situation, but at the same time maintain that composure. So he asks in Lamrim Chemo, he really underscores this. Now, so he calls this Miknam Sosoa, which means train it through the specific observation, through the specific objects of observation, which meant train it in regard to a friend, in regard to enemy, like that, separately, not in the general way, separately. And then in those separate situations also try to really come up with an actual, undeniable subject and challenge yourself. That's how one has to really rise up and build the mental strength to draw from in future situations. That's how you are going to get kind of actual progress along the path. And then once you have done it, then you think of all sentient beings together. Then, irrespective of whether one is confronting one particular person or many or whatever, the mind, the strength of the mind would be something that would be so easily applicable to anyone, provided there were many to focus on. But it will now depend on how many people or subjects you are focusing on. It will be able to draw up the same strength that would be easily applicable to others. So he really emphasizes it, and in this regard, he really comes up with something quite eye-opening, that we have to be really matter of fact. We have to be really factual, approaching things matter of factly. I think COVID has really taught us one lesson: you cannot fake. Be your genuine guy. It really taught us that really, as we have always said, that is just at the doorstep. It could be any time, and that's COVID has just helped in making it clearer. Otherwise, that has always been the case. It could come in so many different ways at any given moment. And then what we carry with us, we carry ourselves with us, and ourselves will be our mind, and that too at the subtlest level or relatively subtle level. But nonetheless, our mind, nothing else. Of course, from a tantric, highest yoga tantra point of view, the accompanying physical energy together with it. Of course, still a composition of body and mind, but in a very subtle sense. That's what we would always be at any varying level of grossness and whatnot. But nonetheless, that's what we are carrying. And our practice, genuine practice, will be what will be with no other things. So that kind of really explains and kind of makes it clear that we need to be very genuine. And in that respect, he says, although he shares this in the context of compassion, but he says that this is true all other practices. What you do is you try to be very resourceful. And here he emphasizes studying classical texts, not just be content with small books, small texts that you may call by so many different names, wonderful names, but unless one is one of those privileged ones who happen to carry huge bag of past karmic positive dispositions, until that is the case, the so-called pity text, small text, no matter how highly spoken of, will not count for you. will not make the difference for you, will not cut the mustard for you. So he says, yes, study classical texts, because that's where you will get so many perspectives, so many approaches, so many, you'll be resourceful in approaching one topic of dealing with anger against an enemy through so many different perspectives, approaches. And one could have this privilege of choosing from so many of these options and see what fits well at that given situation. Or over the time, one would really become resourceful and kind of really going about with the confidence that come what may, I have all these things to try with me. That's one thing. Now the second one is, anytime you are practicing, try to be serious. Not just casually. Not just practice compassion while walking along and talking, and I say, no, that's not going to take root at all. Be serious. In any of the practices that you're doing, be serious in kind of rallying your mind, attention, all of them on the topic. At least at that time. So that whatever you are impinging on the mind could go deeper, stronger. That's two. Number the third is, now do it again and again and again. Regularity. The three combined can be assured to really give rise to good result on anything that you are practicing on. Tsongkhapa says that from his own experience with this authority.
Someone is asking, could you please explain a little bit more about the misunderstanding about self-compassion?
Yeah, the misunderstanding that I'm alluding to has to do with how Buddhist practitioners, particularly those without much familiarity with the Western psychology and whatnot, tend to kind of react to this term self-compassion. Right away, they would think of the same compassion, except it is now directed towards oneself. And in the Buddhist context, that would be the spirit of renunciation, or the spirit of determination to be free from samsara. I allowed myself to use the term renunciation, but that is very, very misleading, because sometimes it conveys a wrong message, saying one has to renounce household. Sometimes they use the term renunciation for that, and then the monks and nuns as renunciate, and then the two lumped together, then renunciation seems like it is alluding to living the household, living a household's life, because renunciates are the monks and nuns. Whereas renunciation, in the way we understand, as a spirit of determination, a determined spirit to be free from the clutches of afflictions, from the slavery of the afflictions, that's a business, that's a Buddhist business. Across the board, everyone who aspires to be Buddhist should be really looking at the afflictions together with the root, the subtle latencies, etc., lumped together as the main enemy, as the main culprit to address. The whole of Buddha's teaching is holding the afflictions both at the manifest level as well as their root level, and then even further down at their subtle instinct latency level as the only culprit. That's all. All the range of teaching from the Pali to the Prasna Paramita, from the Pali tradition to the Sanskrit tradition, or in other words, from the Theravada tradition to the Prasna Paramita tradition, to even the Tantric tradition, including the highest Yoga Tantra. Everything is geared towards dealing with the afflictions or the obscurations, which includes afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations, period. So it is in that respect that the so-called spirit of renunciation, which I'm calling the spirit of determination, or a determined spirit, to be free from the dictates, from the clutches, from the slavery of the afflictions at all of its range of grossness and subtlety, because they stand in the way of our prospect for genuine, stable, uncorrupted, unaltered joy and happiness for oneself and for others. So now that said, when we think of self-compassion in this light of just the same wish to be free from suffering, except it is now directed towards oneself, in the scriptures it says that would be the spirit of the determination to be free from the suffering for oneself. So the ngejung, I don't know what is the Sanskrit term for that. It would be very helpful here. That would be ngejung. So compassion directed towards others. So usually we always speak of compassion as always directed towards others. We do not say self-compassion. But when we come across this term in English, we think that, oh, it's speaking of the spirit of determination to be free from the suffering oneself. Whereas compassion, without the qualification of selfhood today, is the same wish directed towards others for them to be free from suffering. So that's how people usually understand it. But in the Western psychology, that's not necessarily always the case. Self-compassion very often comes in the form of being kind to yourself, gentle to yourself. Don't give in to self-loathing. Don't give in to don't subject oneself to extreme expectation, something that is incongruent with the reality. Kind of don't mistreat oneself. So it could cover a whole range of being more kind in serving oneself well, or being more kind in not subjecting to suffering. So it will not be that well defined between whether it is compassion or loving kindness. It's a mixed bag. So that's what I meant. Likewise, we can say the same thing with regard to the topic of anger. Again, it is misconveyed. It means something in the Western psychology, and it is evolving all the time. Whereas in the way it is used, casually, the word anger to represent for a Tibetan term or a scriptural term, it doesn't really fit well there, because usually people borrow this word anger to stand for a particular term in the scripture called kongdo, which is another term, which is the same, which is another term, another name for hatred. And anger definitely is not hatred, not necessarily all the time. And it is not how it is understood in the Western psychology. But when we use it casually like that, then there is a I myself, then there is a misunderstanding. I myself confronted someone asking me, how come His Holiness says anger is something good in the West, and he says anger is something bad in the East? Now, when you begin to think of what he meant, in the West, he was using the term, English term anger, and he's saying anger understood in the Western context, where you speak of wisdom of anger. Anger is the sense of, sense of, what is that? Sense of, there's another term for that. It's a very similar term. Pardon? As a sense of being wronged, or something like that, but there is a technical term for that. Anyway, and that is not equated with hatred in the West. Now in India, he speaks Tibetan. He uses this Kongdo and Shedang as interchangeable. And people think that Kongdo is anger because that's how generally we call that. And now they kind of see a contradiction between what he's already saying in the East to the Tibetan community and in the West, whereas there is no contradiction. Yeah, I think I spoke so long. Yeah, let's stop here.